I wanted to talk to you about some pressure games, and I'm specifically talking about the kind of pressure that's above and beyond just every Saturday in college football. We love every given Saturday for a reason, but these games that we have circled, I've got 5 of them here, these have some extra juice to them. I'm not going in chronological order, but all of these are happening in the first 5 weeks of the season. Penn State at Auburn, this is in week 3. This is so huge. I've told you before, my favorite pro wrestling event growing up was WrestleMania 17. I'm not alone in that. And as Austin and Rock are doing that walk to the ring before they're going to go to the pre-match bumper, Paul Heyman says it's the match that both men need to win and neither man can afford to lose. That was in 2001. I still remember that vividly even today. I feel the same way about this game. Kind of a game that both teams need to win and neither team can afford to lose. And you may think to yourself, how can that be? It's an out-of-conference game. It's week 3. Yes, it is. Now let's remember the context. Remember what happened in what the casuals would deem the offseason with Brian Harsin and Auburn. They're not working with the same length of rope that maybe the over-under win total would lead you to believe they're working with. I know their over-under win total is 6. 7-5 runs the real risk of Brian Harsin losing his job down there this year. Not that it should, but it does. So we're not endorsing the methodology down there. We're just calling it like we see it. With James Franklin, 11-11 the past 2 years. Now, obviously, JP Poll has Penn State entering the season at number 10. I believe in Penn State. That doesn't mean I'm right. It could go sideways. And if they open the season with a loss either at Purdue or 2 weeks later in this game at Auburn, it'll be very uncomfortable. But my question is this. What if they do open the season with a loss already at Purdue and then they're coming into this game at Auburn? It's pressure-packed regardless. But what if they're running the risk of starting 1-2? Think about that. And then also think about Auburn's second half of their schedule and why it is so necessary, if not mandatory, for them to start fast. I've repeated it, but I'll do it once more for the podcast crowd. They got a couple of layups, and then they got Penn State, Missouri, and LSU. Those are home games. And then it feels like they don't ever play at home again the rest of the way. And they got a bunch of ranked teams and power-rated teams. The only one that they could feel semi-confident in penciling in as a W is Western Kentucky. And I only tell you to pencil that one in because you don't know how battered and beat up you could be by then. Point being, kind of a game that both need to win, neither can afford to lose. Next up, also a week 3 game here. Brigham Young goes to Oregon. And Oregon will have already played Georgia by this point. You know, Brigham Young will have already played Baylor. Baylor. I think it's time to pause and remind you, because I've seen some of you ask in the comment section, why I don't say the initials for Brigham Young. It's nothing personal. It's a personal problem I have, but it's nothing personal against the university. I just really struggle saying the letter Y when there's a letter before it and after it. Just sounds ridiculous. So I say Brigham Young. Sue me. Brigham Young at Oregon in week 3. I guess there's an outside shot. The Every Given Saturday tour could be here. Think about what would happen. Think about how the perspective nationally on this game would change if Oregon beat Georgia in week 1. And then especially if Brigham Young beat Baylor in week 2 and they're both undefeated playing here. So yeah, let's keep that one on the radar. But regardless, let's just say the point spreads hold, and let's say University of Oregon, for example, does lose in week 1 to Georgia. Well, then Dan Lanning and his company, they come home. It's not a huge deal to lose to last year's national champ in their backyard. That's something that most people, I think, expect. But what you can't have is you can't have yourself being bullied twice in the first 3 weeks, including once at home. You can't be out-physicaled twice. And Brigham Young is going to come into Eugene, Oregon, and it'll probably remind people a lot of the physical challenge you had against Utah last year. And I don't think I need to remind anyone how those Oregon versus Utah games went. So if you want to talk pressure, I know that they've barely broken into their new offices there, but Dan Lanning and his coaching staff will feel the pressure in that week 3 game against Brigham Young. And then also there's the pressure on Brigham Young's side of virtually everyone returning, and there's such high hopes this year. Look at how many opportunities they have. They play Baylor in week 2. They go to Oregon, the game we're talking about in week 3. Later, you know they've got Notre Dame. Arkansas goes to Provo to play them. So they got so many opportunities. There's not that one game. It's not like Cincinnati's schedule where you say they play Arkansas, but then the rest of it is G5 competition. No, they got multiple shots here. That's the byproduct of having an independent schedule. So that's the second one I'm looking at. The third one is a week prior. It's in week 2. South Carolina at Arkansas. Huge pressure-packed game here. Where is each of these programs perceptionally? Where are they right now? They're on the climb, right? South Carolina did a lot more than you probably thought they would last year. And the locals, and I think nationally also, perceive that program to still be ascending. Ditto with Arkansas. They did more than you thought they'd do last year. And the locals, myself included, perceive the program to still be in ascension mode. Neither have peaked, in other words. I think it's fair to say that's the national perception. Yet they play in week 2 this year. And so South Carolina's got Georgia the following week, and they will be a healthy home underdog in that game. So on one hand, you got some real positive momentum that could be shot already if you start 1-2. And then over on the Arkansas side, if you think about what all they have out of conference and in conference, they open against Cincinnati. The next week is this game. South Carolina coming in there. You already know if you lose that game, that's a conference loss. And if you lose that game, that's before you play A&M. That's before you play Bama. That's before you go to Mississippi State. You got a trip to Auburn later in the year. LSU comes to town. Ole Miss comes to town. So you've got so much left that I guarantee you anyone in and around Fayetteville, Arkansas, who has done the old win-loss exercise on their helmet grid schedule, they've got both of these first 2 games as wins. Now, they may say they'll be good, stiff competition, but we're not losing to Cincinnati, we're not losing to South Carolina. And all of a sudden, if you lose either one of those, and especially this one because it's a conference game, things feel like they change a little bit quicker than you thought they would this year. How about we go all the way to week 5? Let's go to the ACC. This is the one pretty much everyone has circled in this conference. NC State at Clemson. Week 5. Everyone's got it circled. I've got it circled. Jesse and Colin have it circled. I'm pretty sure our production executives have it circled. Success or failure for Clemson this year is point blank winning the ACC championship. At the very least, getting back to the game. I think we would all agree with that. And yet, this is a division opponent of theirs. And this is not the Pac-12 where they just take the 2 best teams. You still got to win your division in the ACC as of this moment, at least, to make it to Charlotte for the ACC championship game. And so NC State got the better of them last year. 27-20, I want to say was the final score. I think that was an overtime game. You see the over-under win totals. If you're listening on podcast, Clemson is a solid 2 games above NC State from an odds maker's perspective when it comes to preseason win totals. And a big part of that is Clemson gets NC State at home. Just think this through with me. Think about how much the division and the league could change on that given Saturday. Every given Saturday, this one especially. If NC State goes to Clemson, boom, 24-21, they pull off the upset. They essentially hold a game and a half lead over them in the division standings. So it's going to take a couple of losses for Clemson to climb over them, and it's going to take Clemson not losing again. And that's where I want you to look at the rest of NC State's schedule. They don't play Miami in the regular season. So their other stiffest conference tests would be Florida State at home, Virginia Tech at home, Wake at home, Boston College at home. Their only other 2 road games of any note in the ACC are at Louisville and at North Carolina. Now, for the record, those are the last 2 games of the year. But by then, man, that defense is zoned in. Offensively, your team, you just are what you are at that point, and chances are you're favored even in road environments. So this one's huge. You can talk all you want to about power ratings, and we do it on this show. And you can talk about who'd be favored on a neutral field. NC State at Clemson. That's essentially what the ACC, at least in that division, may come down to on that Saturday. And 1 week before that, I got to talk about a big one in the Big Ten. Michigan at Iowa. This is a rematch of your Big Ten championship game last year. And if you don't remember that, it's because the final was 42-3. It was a splattering. Michigan over Iowa. It's the first time we're going to see pressure applied to Michigan this year, unless Maryland pulls something off in the Big House. It'll be the first time that they have to go on the road, period. And it'll be the first time, easily the first time they face a team physically that can match up with them. And this is also where we get to put one of the big statements that's circulating out there about Michigan to the test. That statement, which I don't endorse, obviously, is They are a shell of what they were last year. They'll fall back. They'll come back to the pack. Last year was great, but you had the off-the-field drama with Harbaugh, which I care less and less about as the days go on. And you lost some guys like Hutchinson and Ajabo to the NFL. You just can't replicate that. I'm a believer this team will be every bit as good, if not maybe even better than last year, and I've spelled that out for you. I've given you the reasons why. Well, anyway, the beauty of this game is we get to test it all. Because if they go on the road against the team that they housed in the Big Ten championship game and they either get upset or it's a struggle down to the wire and offensively they can't move the ball, well, then all of a sudden, maybe, depending on how the game shakes out, we're looking at it and we're saying, either the Michigan doubters were right and I was wrong, or maybe they handled them. And by the way, this is an extremely difficult place to go into. Everybody in the Big Ten talks about this. I grew up in the South. People don't talk about Kinnick Stadium. That's only because no Southern teams go in there. Everybody who goes in there talks about, especially early in the year when Iowa's got everything in front of them to play for, everyone talks about how difficult an environment that is, and they always cross their fingers. This is where the Fox contract is huge for road teams. They all want that noon game. All Penn State, Michigan, all the folks who have to go into Iowa City, they want that noon kickoff. You may despise it. I know the folks in Iowa despise it. They want to play. They don't want it to be nighttime when they kick that thing off. So Michigan at Iowa, NC State at Clemson, South Carolina at Arkansas, Brigham Young at Oregon, and Penn State at Auburn. Those are some, not an exhaustive list, but some of the pressure games I've got my eye on.